Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. We've got an interesting show today. Our guest, Dr. Tiffanie Tate Moore, is the poster child for resilience. Raised by an aunt in Compton, California, because both her parents were strongly addicted to drugs and alcohol, Dr. Tiffany grew up to be a valedictorian, an OBGYN surgeon, a medical officer in the United States Navy, and had a successful practice doing medical work in Riverside, California. Now, that's pretty impressive, I must say, but that does not take into account that Dr. Tiffany was abused in early childhood, was shot in the back by a drive-by shooting, and had to quit medical practice at the age of 44 because of a hand injury that prevented her from practicing surgery. After depression and feelings of uselessness, Dr. Tiffany once again discovered her innate and learned resistance to overcome these challenges and to become a woman of great value to her society and to herself. I can't wait to hear from Dr. Tiffany just what it takes to overcome horrific life challenges and become a person of value, service, honor, and a commitment to a life serving God. With that, let's bring on Dr. Tiffanie Tate Moore. Dr. Moore, Dr. Tiffany, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Hello, Charlie. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you and your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. It's going to be fun talking to you. You know, we have so much to talk today in a very short time, and you have such a story of hope and resilience that will encourage our listeners and offer practical advice in overcoming life's challenges. Now, you were raised in Compton, California, typically known as the inner city, and yet you never seem to allow that to deter your accomplishment to accomplish your dreams. You had the influence of your aunt, your ever-loving aunt, your mother's sister, and also an uncle named Uncle Amen. Is that correct?
Uncle Amen, yeah, my
Uncle Amen. And I'd like to hear the stories of your aunt and uncle.
Yes, my mother was one of 12 kids, and so my grandmother believed in being fruitful and multiplying.
She took the Bible verse seriously.
Yes, very literal. And so I have over 30 first cousins. And so while I was born an only child, I never reaped those benefits because there was always someone around. It was just very loving family. So, I grew up poor, but we never really knew we were poor because there was always someone with something, and whatever they had, they shared it. And so we always had lots of love, and we just spent a lot of time together as a family. And basically, my uncle, he was a professor or a teacher at Compton Community College, and he really focused on education, and he really made sure that the students, especially me, because I was really into, academics, I stayed involved in different summer programs and things like that because he saw that I was interested in things like that. And so he just really encouraged me and supported me in that way. And he was like, okay, if that's what you're into, keep it up, study hard. A positive word goes a long way when you don't get a whole lot of that.
It sure does.
Yeah, she was just a workaholic, and she provided a lot of love, and she made sure we stayed involved and did a lot of community service.
Tell me something. I just returned from Africa, and I go to Africa 2 to 3 times a year. We drill water wells in rural Uganda for people who drink water that you wouldn't even put your hand into. It's so dirty. And yet, like what you said, you were so poor, but you didn't know it. I know I was not from extremely poor family, but it was lower middle class, and we never knew, maybe because we didn't have anything to compare to, we never knew that we weren't, just as well off as anybody else. And And I find that with the people in Africa as well that have nothing, that have ragged clothes and live in huts and have no water, electricity, or latrine. They have latrines, but they don't have toilets. What is it you think that brings about? In some ways, I find they're happier than the people that are rich.
I think it's because you really don't appreciate what you don't have because you don't know that you don't have it. And like when I would come home from school, my aunt, she used to work at Lucky's Supermarket as a cashier, and she eventually worked her way up to becoming a manager. And so she would always come home with food, and she would wonder, where's all the food going? Well, I didn't realize how fortunate I was until I would go outside and the other kids would be hungry. I would make, these little sugar sandwiches and syrup sandwiches. I was like a little mini hostess, and I would take the food that we had in the house, and I would feed all the kids on the street with the food that we had in our house.
Yeah, you got to tell me this story. You call them cheddar sandwiches, and I don't know if I'm politically incorrect or not, but you called them ghetto sandwiches, and you called them,
yes.
They were all sweets that you.
Yeah,
it just sounded wonderful. I wanted one.
Yeah, it's a little sugar sandwich, a little syrup sandwich. I mean, there's no nutritional value except to take the hunger pains off your little belly. We were a bunch of little latchkey kids. We walked home. There were no adult supervision. We let ourselves in, and we made our own snacks, and we played outside in the street and did our homework and things like that until the street lights came on. But we essentially took care of ourselves. But some of the kids, they didn't have food at home. And so they didn't have bread. But, my aunt worked at a supermarket. So in my mind, we had an abundance of food. And so something as simple as bread that the other kids didn't have, well, I was like, well, she can always come home with more the next day. Because at the supermarket, they had lots of bread. And so she would come home wondering, well, where's all the bread? I gave it to all the kids in the neighborhood. And
so where did you get that heart for giving, to give to people and to care about people? Where did that come from? Was that something natural, or was that something learned? What was that all about?
I think because of her heart for taking me in, because she already had 2 kids of her own, and for her to be so openly willing to take me in and raise me as her own, that showed a significant amount of love, because not everyone was willing to, just take on an extra child and raise an extra child as their own. My other aunts and uncles, they did love me, but nobody was willing to take me and raise me. That's a whole different burden to bear. And so, but she took on me as a burden. My mother and father, they were married, and, I think he worked for like McDonnell Douglas. He was doing really well, but they were introduced to drugs at a very early stage in their marriage. I guess he used a really bad drug that really fried his brain, and he flipped out, and they got divorced. And so, but he was really cheap. I believe he wouldn't even let my mother buy a bassinet, even though he made good money. She told me the story that they put me in a drawer when I came home from the hospital. I was a drawer baby.
A drawer baby. I've not heard that phrase.
Yeah, I was a drawer baby.
Yeah, but I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have a bassinet. I got put in a drawer. They broke up very early, but after they divorced, he ended up being homeless on the streets. I always had compassion for the people who were homeless, because I was thinking, well, I never met my father. Maybe I could be nice to him on the street inadvertently. So I've always had compassion for the homeless on the street. But my mother struggled with drug addiction as from that point forward as well. And so much so that I had to be taken from her and given to my aunt. My parents and my family, like I said, they were 12. There were 12 of them. And so whenever you gave gifts to like the police station or the fire department, usually they went to like my aunts and uncles, because that's how poor they were growing up. So I've always had compassion, because I was like, okay, you have to pay it forward. If you're giving, and eventually that came to my family in the past, I have to give, because I think that what goes around comes around.
You know, that's interesting. Our paths are different in many ways, but similar in some ways, in that I, too, was raised by, they were not drug addicts, but they were alcoholics. And my father was a serious alcoholic. You know, he drank a minimum of a quart of liquor a day. And my mother worked graveyard and just didn't have time to take care of me. So from the time I was maybe 3 to 7 years old, I lived with different families, and they used to tell me, "Would you like to live with us?" And I said, "Of course." And then 3 months later, I was shipped off to another family. So what am I to assume other than, there's something wrong with me? They invite me and then they don't keep me, then I'm not worthy, and that too has impacted my sense of empathy for children that don't have that kind of parental. You know what it taught me, and I think and I think you understand. It taught me how not to be a parent. It taught me I learned to be a better parent by not being parented. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It you grow up with abandonment issues, but it makes you not abandon other people. And so you value people's feelings more.
Yeah, because you know the pain of abandonment. Yeah, and rejection. Now, you were talking about your aunt and your Uncle Almond. They sound like very loving and caring and heartfelt people. But one thing that when you and I spoke earlier, you talked about that at a very young age, you began attending church because you felt your parents and caregivers were not necessarily church-going people. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I was able to attend church with my cousin. I would try to go to church with whomever I could. And I was able to I got baptized at New Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Los Angeles with my cousin Mia. That was a big deal for me. I didn't own a Bible. I had come across Christ at a park, because you never know how impactful your church is when you do different outreach. And a church had an outreach at a park, and I was at a playground, and there was a mime ministry outreach, and they were performing to the Winan song Tomorrow. And so the lyrics really spoke to me. Like Jesus said, "Let me in," and he said, "I will tomorrow." And I was like, oh, I like this Jesus thing. I want more of it.
And how old were you at that time?
At that time, I think I was probably in around the third, fourth grade.
That is so young to catch that, to understand that. I mean, most kids that young, it shows your intelligence, most kids that young don't really comprehend it. All they can think about is, cutting out little Jesus figures and running things around, and you were thinking much more seriously about your faith at that point.
Yeah, my life had been so hard, and my aunt had finally broken up with her boyfriend, who was physically, emotionally, and sexually abusive towards me, and I was thankful that was out. But and I hadn't told anyone about that, but I had survived that. But I had been dealing with so much abuse and enduring so much pain. I was like, okay, anything is going to be better than what I'm dealing with. I was longing for something different, and I've experienced so much. I have so many stories that I can tell you about. We just don't have enough time to delve into all of them. And so, and I knew God was real because of some other experiences that I had had. And so when God spoke to me, it was like all these things were happening so fast. And it was like, okay, it's time. Everything was just happening quickly and falling into place. And so when I got baptized, then I joined the Christian Fellowship Club, and everything was just kind of rolling along quickly.
So tell me about the Fellowship Christian Club, because if I understand it right, it was at one of those events that you incurred you were involved in a drive-by shooting. Was it at one of those events or a different event?
It was a different event. Christian Fellowship Club was through school. So that was when I really began to have a closer relationship with God. And then I was at a Bible study, a home Bible study, when I was shot, because it was around the 4th of July. And usually, when you're in Compton, you hear some popping. You're thinking, okay, it's likely a drive-by shooting because you anticipate those. But because it was around the 4th of July, you were thinking, oh, it's probably fireworks. But by the time we realized, oh, no, it's not fireworks, we started diving to the ground. It was a little too late. By the time I hit the ground, my back was already hurting. And you can see that the bullet came through the wall, through the sofa, and it struck me, right next to my spine. And so when I got
up... It came through the walls and the sofa. That didn't stop the bullet.
No, it did not. It came through the wall, through the sofa. It hit my spine, right next to my spine, right adjacent to my spine. And so, yeah, you could see the hole. You could look through, your eye could pierce through the hole of the house.
So it's I've watched too many movies. It's what's called that what's called it through and through?
Yeah. It went through the house, yeah. And so it was truly a miracle because the paramedics, when they showed up, they were like, you should be paralyzed. But I was up walking around. And so it was the hand of God on me because it was truly a blessing. And they were like, we want to take you to the hospital. And they wanted to take me to the local community hospital. And I was like, no, I'm going to my private insurance hospital. I knew enough not to go to the community hospital. And so I was like, I don't think so. I'm going to wait for my auntie to get off work, and we're going to call her, and she'll take me. So I'm like, I'm up.
So you just sat there with a hole in your back until you had time to go to the hospital that you wanted?
Well, I was actively bleeding, and so my cousin, she pointed at me, and she started crying, and I reached around, and I saw the blood, and so they bandaged me up, and they put pressure on it. And so she took off work, and she took me straight away. But, yeah, we went straight to the hospital. But no, I didn't go with them to the community hospital. I went to Kaiser because I had private insurance. I wasn't going to go to the community hospital, to the local community hospital there.
Did that have any impact, or had you already decided you wanted to be a physician? Had that any impact on your desire to be a physician?
At that point, I had already wanted to become a doctor because we used to go around and feed the homeless in Los Angeles. And while feeding the homeless, I would see how sickly that they looked. Watching them, I had so much compassion for them. And I wanted to feed the homeless all the time and meet all of their needs. But I knew that was impractical. And I figured, okay, the best way I could help them is probably by becoming a physician. And so that was when I had the desire to become a doctor, by volunteering with my church's mission. And that was before I got shot.
So the church really it's had in several different ways, it's had a major impact on your life. And obviously, we say church, but you and I both know that's Jesus Christ that is working in your life, and that's been a very profound part of your life.
Absolutely.
Let's fast forward just a little bit, well, first of all, before I fast forward, I mentioned it in the introduction, but you were valedictorian, so that means you were not only unusually intelligent, but you were a hard worker. If you were a latchkey kid, that means you had to come home on your own and decide on your own to do your homework. You couldn't wait for a parent to say you've got to do your homework. You got to. What gave you that motivation to do that?
When I was growing up, I used to watch a lot of TV, and back in the 80s, I really loved those commercials with Nancy Reagan, and it was like, this is drugs and this is your brain on drugs.
And the fried eggs or whatever it was, yeah.
And so I was like, okay, that was my mom and dad, and this was their brain. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to stay away from. And it was like, and education is the key to your future. So I was like, okay, education is the key to my future. I want those keys. I want a future. And so if education is the key to my future, I have to get an education because I want the key to my future. And so that is what helped me keep pushing forward and focus on my studies.
That's amazing. That is just, and you know how unusual that story is, that most kids are interested in, and in any neighborhood, they're interested in playing sports or riding their what do you call them, their skateboards or bicycles or whatever, playing around. You were in your kitchen classroom doing your work, doing what you had to do because you had a bigger goal in mind. That's amazing at such a young age that you had that. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, I was definitely cut from a different cloth. When I started middle school, I started with a leather briefcase, not a traditional backpack. I was that kid.
Oh, my goodness. So let's fast forward a couple of years, maybe decade. You graduate high school, you graduate college, and then at what point and how did it work out that what was it that attracted you to join the United States Navy?
So I was in medical school. I was like, geez, I need money. And I was like, okay. I was like, all right. I was like, okay, I need more money. I just didn't have it. And so I took a job. I did well in gross anatomy. So I was a TA. I was a teacher's assistant for gross anatomy. So I had a job I was a medical student. So I was a working medical student as a teacher assistant. And then I took a job as a waitress at a Waffle House.
While you were in medical school?
Well, while I was in medical school, I was a waitress at the Waffle House. And so then I was like, okay, I got my letter saying how much I was going to owe for that first year. And I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to repay this. And I was like, okay, I have some different options. And there were different scholarships available, but the scholarship that I liked the most was serving my country. Just because I think that, I have a lot of family members who served, and I thought it would be a privilege and an honor to also serve the country that has served me. I think that everyone, if given the opportunity, should serve in the military. When I looked at the different branches, I liked the Navy the best. I chose to join the United States Navy. There are different non-military scholarships available, but it just didn't interest me. I prefer to serve my country. And so I joined the Navy, but I think it was very funny to join the Navy to see the world. And, and I joined in Nashville, Tennessee, and I went to UC Santa Barbara, and I got sent to Ventura.
So 20 miles from where you went to school was as much as you got to see the world.
Yes. I thought I was going to go to Okinawa, Guam. Nope, I got sent to Ventura. But it was good. It was a really great experience. I loved being with the CVs, the construction battalion. It was fabulous. But I wouldn't change a thing, maybe.
And I agree with you so much about the strength of the armed services and the young women and men that come out of the armed services that are serious, that didn't just go through it for their 2 years and get out, but people that were serious. That they learned so much about discipline, so much about acts that matter, focus life, presenting purpose in your life. I happen to be raised differently. See, I'm a bit older than you, so I was raised in the 60s, and I was at UCLA in the hippie days, and so I was protesting more. Now I see, did me what good it could do me. I believe you play the cards that you're dealt. if I were doing it all over again, I would certainly serve in the military service. I think the people I know that have done it have been very successful in their lives.
Yeah, it was a great time.
So you're in the Navy for 7 years, is that correct?
Yes.
And then you leave the Navy, and do you go to work right as an OBGYN at Riverside, or do you have something in between?
Yeah, I go to Vanderbilt, and I complete my residency at Vanderbilt, and then I practice in private practice in Nashville, and then I go to Riverside.
And how long did that all take?
I guess I did private practice in Hendersonville, Tennessee for a good 4 years, Riverside for a good 10.
And something happened in Riverside that changed your life, didn't it?
Yes, I fell. And that was not good because I had just hit my stride. I just turned 40. I became a partner in the group. I put a water slide in my backyard. I was happy. I was in my zone. And I was like, look, God, we are good. We are in a zone. I am zen. We are there. I thought I had made it. And my balloon was popped. And,
I want to hear all about that story, but before we do that story, I think we need to take a quick break, and then we can go to that story and go on from there. So give me just a couple of minutes. We'll take a break, and we'll come right back. Hi there, you're listening to Charlie Hedges in the Next Chapter with Charlie, and my very special guest today is Dr. Tiffanie Tate Moore. And Dr. Tiffany has just an awesome story, and she's just telling us about her childhood, growing up, going through difficulties, going through challenges, her dedication to education. She became a physician, became an OBGYN, and served in the United States Navy, went to school at Vanderbilt to get her residency, served private practice back east, and then went to Riverside, California. But then in Riverside, California, just when life seems to be hitting a roll and everything is going great, something happened. You said you fell. Tell us that story.
Yes. So I was exiting the call room, or a call trailer, and my ankle twisted, and I got caught in the stairs, and I did a swan dive onto the concrete. And when you fight with the concrete, sometimes the concrete wins. Well, 100% of the time the concrete wins. And I ended up in bilateral wrist, bilateral knee, and bilateral ankle braces. And
what does now help us who are not physicians? What does bilateral mean?
That means braces on both my wrists, both my knees, and both my ankles.
Oh my goodness!
Joints.
Were you in a wheelchair?
No, I was able to walk, but I just looked really pathetic. I looked really, really pathetic. So I wore long shirts and long skirts to try to cover up everything. And when you're in sunny Southern California, it was a sight to see because I looked hot. And I don't mean in a good way. And it was bad, and so I tried everything I could to avoid surgery. I had steroid shots in both of my wrists and both of my knees and my ankles. I tried physical therapy. I did everything I could to avoid surgery, and I tried to work and push through my pain for as long as I could until it got to the point where I just couldn't take the pain anymore. And then I tried to batch my surgeries all together, and overlap my recovery time to minimize my time away from work.
Was that a good decision, or do you think you might do that differently now?
You know, in hindsight, I don't think it was a good decision. I was so wrapped up in trying to get back to work, to take care of patients, I didn't think about my own health. I was so focused on other people that I didn't think about me. Because most people, when you have a knee surgery, you'll have a knee surgery, recover for 6 months, and, go back. I had one knee surgery. 3 months later, I had another knee surgery. 2 months later, I had a wrist surgery. I mean, I was literally just trying to hammer through trying to get back to work. My focus was getting back to work. That's all I could think about was getting back to work. And so post-op day 10, after my second knee surgery, I ended up in the hospital because I couldn't breathe. And I was diagnosed with pericarditis, which is inflammation of the heart.
How did that happen? Was that part of the injury, or was that something completely different?
Completely different. It just came out of nowhere. It was just a curveball.
Oh,
it was the post-surgical complication. I was on oxygen. I was sitting in the car trying to breathe, and I couldn't breathe and talk. They ruled me out for a pulmonary embolism. I thought I was going to go home. They took me off of oxygen. I tried to get up and walk. I couldn't. They had to call a respiratory code because my oxygen saturations dropped when they took me off the oxygen. And that was when they worked me up and diagnosed me with the pericarditis. I was in the hospital for 4 days and 3 nights.
Oh, my.
While they had to figure this out, because they didn't understand how this healthy young woman could not function off of oxygen. And because I had to be on the medication for the pericarditis, after I had my wrist surgery, my wrist wouldn't heal. And that caused a delay in my bone, and that led me to end up with a frozen joint.
And that was in your right hand, is that correct?
My right wrist, yes.
And that's what prevented you from becoming returning to a surgeon?
Yes.
And you still have that situation now?
Yep. So all because I was trying to rush back to work.
What do you do now that you're no longer a surgeon? This is a dream of you since childhood, and you're taking your childhood dream that you accomplished. A lot of times we have childhood dreams, so we don't get a chance to accomplish them. You accomplished your dream. What did that do to you mentally, psychologically, emotionally? How did that impact you when you have this very prestigious and purposeful career? How did that impact you?
It sent me into a depression. I was not okay. I did not realize how much of me was wrapped up in my job. And it took a lot for me to come out of that. And actually, it took a friend who came over and checked on me. She was like, "Tiffany, are you okay? I don't think you're okay." I said, "No, I'm not okay." And that's the sad part. Most people suffer in silence. We don't ask for help. We don't tell people that we need help. I appreciated her checking on me. It was a good thing. And it took that for me to realize, hey, I need to get it together because I am more than my job. I'm a mother. I am a child of God. I do have more to offer this world. Yeah, my job was my profession, but I am more than my profession. And I still do have something that I can give this world. And so when I started to write to encourage myself, to think about how good God was to me. And I started writing my poetry. Sometimes I couldn't sleep at night and I would write. And I just wrote in the memo section of my phone. I never wrote with the intent to publish a poetry book. Actually, when I thought I was going to die, I was like, you know what, Lord, I've been meaning to write my autobiography to talk about how good you've been to me. If I come out of this, I'm going to write my autobiography. So when God put it on my heart to write a poetry book, I was like, are you kidding? You want me to write a poetry book? I'm a doctor. I don't write poetry books. Are you kidding me? You want me to write a poetry book? I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is a joke, right? Nobody wants to read my poetry. And so, but I shared it with a few people, and they're like, no, this could really help some people. You should publish this. I said, okay, Lord, obedience is better than sacrifice. I will publish, and we will see what happens. So here I am. And I guess there is a place for poetry. So,
you know, something that may be encouraging to you. I wish I could give you the source of the article, but it was a credible source. It might have been from Yale or Princeton. Do you know what the most productive ages of life are turning for people who are doing things? You know what the most productive ages of life are?
Mm-mm.
The 60s and 70s. That is when you are producing more than you've ever produced. And that is, you know, given that you're not a couch potato and you know, some kind of user or something, but you have wisdom, you have knowledge, you still, in your 60s and 70s, you still have energy, maybe not the energy you had at 30 years old, but you still, you have so much more than you can give. And I think you're proving that. You're proving that no matter what your age, and you're not close to 60 or 70, but you are proving that the older you get, the wiser you get, the more productive and meaningfully productive, not just productive in the American sense of productivity, but in the sense of the biblical sense of adding value to society, to people, to the kingdom of God. And it sounds to me like you have a lot of that going.
I try, absolutely.
I have just a couple questions left, and one of the questions that I read an article about you, and it talked about resilience, and I think of all that you have been through your childhood, through your adulthood, through, you know, going to school, going to the Navy, facing what you faced at Riverside, that you are the poster child for resilience. Tell me about how important resilience is to you.
I think resilience is the pinnacle of life, and I try to teach that to my children. And I always stress to them that FAIL stands for first attempt in learning, because it doesn't stop there. And if there's a first, there can be a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth, and so forth. And numbers are infinite. So you should never give up. You should never stop trying. And as long as there's breath in your body, there's an opportunity to keep going.
How do you help people who don't have clarity about see, you had great clarity about what you wanted to do. I think we face in America today, we have so many options and so many toys and so many distractions that people don't even really know, although they're hungering for purpose. We're hungering for meaning. I think it's one of the great attributes of a happy life, of a successful life. How do you help people that can't seem to find purpose, can't seem to find meaning? Is there anything you can do to help them?
I think when you don't know where to start, just start at the beginning. Take it one step at a time. You know, they always say, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so, you know, that's really true when it comes to life and your options. So if you are one of those people with, you know, professional ADHD and you think you want to do everything, make a list and say, okay, there are 5 things I want to do. Pick one and start with that one. And if you don't like it, move on to the second one. Then move on to the third one. Move on to the fourth one. Move on to the fifth one. Work your way down the list. Just take it one item at a time. And it's okay that if you don't like the item, just move on to the next one.
Maybe it wasn't a good item. You know, doesn't just because you wrote it down once doesn't mean that it was a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's okay. It's okay to fail. You know, we have these misconceived notions that we impose on ourselves, and we don't give ourselves compassion. And we really need to give self-compassion. We give compassion to everyone else, but we don't give ourselves any self-compassion. And I had to learn to do that.
That's really true. You know, something I was, I just returned from this flight, and one flight was 16 and a half hours. And so I typically don't watch television on a plane. I write. And I wrote, Dr. Tiffany, I did a podcast a couple of years ago, and somebody talked about noble aims. What are your noble aims in life? And I turned out now, one time it was 4, and now it's 6 noble aims. I keep a checklist of what do I need to do. And for example, my noble aims are quite simple. It's spirituality, it's family, it's this podcast, it's working with a charity, it's being curious and traveling, and finally it's writing, because like you, I'm writing a book right now. But I have activities that I check. I don't check daily, I don't check weekly. I just check monthly, and I give myself a simple plus, check, or minus. How am I doing at this? Am I doing okay at this, or do I need to improve? And if I get a check, minus, or below, it says I need to start doing something in this activity, or, like we mentioned, maybe it wasn't a good idea, and I should just drop it and give myself more time to do the other things. But I like this concept of noble aims, and all of us within us have this noble aim, something that contributes to the value of society and contributes to the kingdom of God and contributes to helping other people, don't you think?
Absolutely.
So let's close with this, Dr. Tiffany. Everyone in life incurs setbacks. Everyone's dreams have fallen short. Now, not everyone has had to experience your life, I'm sure that we haven't talked about, but your life of racism. We have all experienced challenges, but you have experienced more than many. And what I would like you to do at this time, and I don't think I've ever done this on the podcast, is I would like you to close the show with a message of hope. What would you have to tell our audience based on what we've talked about? What would you like to tell our audience about a message of hope?
I would like to tell the audience that no matter how hard life gets, as long as you have breath in your body, you have the opportunity to have a better tomorrow. And you should never stop trying, and you should never give up, and that God is with you. No matter what comes your way, you can persevere, you can endure, you can overcome. And no matter what, it will get better.
That is a wonderful message. As we say in church, that a preach. That's a wonderful close. Dr. Tiffanie Moore, you are indeed a most impressive woman, and I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the Next Chapter with Charlie.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
In addition to getting a copy of your book, Flow Try, I have included show links that I found elsewhere that are to your Instagram and Facebook accounts. Is that a good place to try to get a hold of you?
Yes, you can definitely reach me on Instagram.
On Instagram, okay. I've got the address listed on
Tiffanie Tate Moore. Yes.
Yes, and I also have a link to your book in case that I'm sure readers will want to read your poems. Thank you so much once again for joining me. And once again, that's it for today. And this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.